The Western world is silent because we've airbrushed out the matriarch. Being a wise woman isn't just about having answers, it's about having the voice that people follow. My guest is Tamsen Webster, the idea whisperer behind the world's most powerful TED Talks. She's the author of Say What They Can't Unhear and the master of the red thread, the logic that makes your message irresistible. Tamsen, I believe that midlife is the best time of our lives, and yet so many women don't. To
Mm.
lead in our homes and workplaces and community, we must be heard. And along with our listeners, I'm really ready to listen and learn from you today because you are the wordsmith around getting our messages heard. Welcome
Mm.
to the pod.
Well, I am delighted to be here. And I share your fierceness about making sure that, or doing whatever we can to reframe this part of our lives. So,
Mm.
however I can help, I am happy to.
All right, cool. So let's start with what was the catalyst? What turned you into being an idea whisperer? How did you get here?
Ah, goodness. Well, I would say it has been a story often told of not feeling um heard or understood from sometimes some of the earliest memories I have, to recognizing that in other groups that I kind of was part of, to particularly seeing people with deep passions struggle to get other people to hear what they had to say and even give some of those ideas time of day. Um, so it took a practical professional route by starting off in marketing and communications, but um, one of the things that always kind of bothered me about marketing and branding was that there seemed to be this gap between, so often I would say bad marketing and branding is about talking about what you wish were true. When anytime I worked in an organization or for an organization or with one, uh, and this turned out to be true for people as well, there was always something incredibly powerful about what they already were. And it was about kind of pulling that to the surface and really talking about that. So, um, just over the years, as I've been endlessly fascinated by this idea and this question of how can we accelerate the understanding and adoption of new ideas, I just have it is the question that keeps on giving. And so it's just one of those things where I love it. I love the work that the people that it leads me to. I love working with all these ideas. And I really love giving people the tools to give, their experience, their approach, their point of view, their perspective. When it turns into products and services, fine, but fundamentally, you give people the tools to really give those thoughts and ideas the best possible chance of survival in this wild, wild world of ours.
It is a wild, wild world at the moment.
Yep, it
Far
is.
out. Um, your book, The Red Thread, I found invaluable. I've been playing through that, but a lot of people probably aren't, may not be aware of it. What is the red thread? Because that's a great starting place, isn't it, to help us
Yeah.
make sense of the noise in our own lives.
Well, it's exactly that. So it's an idiom that I borrowed from generally Northern Europe, where they use the red thread to describe exactly that, the thing that makes things make sense, the through line, the kind of connection, that holds everything together. And I mean, even interior designers reference a red thread, of what's the red thread of the space. Um, and interestingly, there's red threads in almost every major religion and philosophy. So, there is something to this idea of, what makes it all make sense, what makes it all coherent. And so to me, that was like one of my first answers to how do we accelerate the understanding and adoption of new ideas. It's like, well, it's got to make sense. Like, because
Mhm.
if it doesn't make sense to us when we first hear something, it's not that it automatically will fail, whatever this new piece of information or, suggestion, action, idea might be, but it's got a really much harder battle, right? If
Mm.
it doesn't make kind of instant instant intuitive sense. And then even if it makes that sense, it's got to stand up to that like secondary, like analytical, intellectual check on like, well, does it really make sense? And so the red thread was really figuring out a way to operationalize something I know that's close to your heart, which is story. And story is 100% one of the ways that we make things make sense of the world. And story really though is simply this articulation of why things happen the way they do, or what happened when and how and why. And this kind of linear progression of like this happened and this happened because this and this is what it means, right? And talking about finding voices, one of the subsets of people I tend to work with a lot, and certainly did in the early days of my work with TEDx events, was a lot of folks from certain professional or academic backgrounds, let's say engineers or some kinds of physical scientists, technologists, are fundamentally uncomfortable telling stories. It's just not done, right? Either in
Yeah.
their profession or they don't feel comfortable. It feels way too right brain for them. And they're like very, very like intellectual people. And I was like, yes, and stories are so powerful. So the red thread, which is my red thread, is what I consider to be a universal structure of story, was my answer to that. And
Mm.
essentially what it is kind of the five sections that are, kind of five elements that are present in any story. And any time that we make sense of something in a story type format, these five things are present. And so it was really began as this idea of like, what if I could take this quite technical idea with this quite technical person and work with them to deconstruct this idea into the form of a story so that we could get the benefit of the story without that person ever having to tell a story. And turns out that works, but that's really, in a lot of ways where the red thread came from and what it does.
And so academic kind people, they have a structure, your 5 steps, that helps them to get the importance of flow within a story.
Yep. But the good news is it kind of works for everybody else too. So,
Yeah.
I mean, even if you're looking back and saying, so why did I do this thing that I've done? I mean, I can tell my own life story in the course of, kind of following this thing, which is, I had this question, how can we, you know, it, the way that it was asking it once upon a time is like, how can I help people of great passions, like get their ideas out into the world? And, what I notice is that there's often this gap between what somebody is trying to say, what they want to say, and what people need to hear in order to understand. But
Mm.
fundamentally, one of the things I've discovered over and over again is that every idea is has a story because every idea is built on a story. And so the discovery that I've made over again and again in my life is that if we can build the story that people will tell themselves about a new idea, they are much more likely to follow it.
Mm. Because
And
a lot of,
that's,
yep.
so that's it. I just lived that format and that kind of thing. You're like, oh, hopefully. Oh, okay, that makes sense. And you may want like different details about like, well, tell me about a time when, but still the structure was there. And so that's the kind of thing where someone goes, oh, that feels like a story. Oh, she told a story. I'm like, no, actually, I didn't tell you like a narrative story of like, hey, there was this one time. But I did tell you a story because it was architected, it was structured in that same way that just kind of gives it kind of a vessel into which it can kind of just get uploaded into somebody else's brain. It's a pattern of information that people recognize. And so, one of the things that's been one of the most delightful discoveries about this work is that this idea of a red thread, or even deeply, like more deeply, what is this kind of core philosophy that you use to live your life? Um, it shows up in every way. And I've used the red thread to help people prepare for job interviews. I've helped people do it to like write books or to figure out their talks, or to make sense of information somebody else is giving them. Like they're trying to say, okay, well, what is this person really telling me? Because again, it is fundamentally a way that we make sense of things. So it means that we can use it to figure out what must we have thought in order to reach this conclusion, which is where it's useful to kind of deconstruct an idea that already exists. Um, but it can also be used to kind of go forward and say, how do I take this thing that is my life
Mm.
and talk about it in a way that's immediately relevant to the person I'm talking to, understandable to the person that I'm talking to, and yet still absolutely genuine to who I am, what I've done, and why. And
Mm.
to me, that's a magical combination, whether you're talking about branding and marketing or just human
Being
connection.
you, yeah.
Yeah.
Because it's such a noisy world at the moment, and some people think just be louder to get heard. I know. Does that, for
Sorry.
those watching on YouTube,
I'm
Tammy just
awesome to play
poked her
poker
tongue
with,
out.
by the way. Oh, yeah. I mean, so my part of my focus on with all of this has always been, not always, I can't say it's always been. It because there's a very, very formative experience over an extended period of time. I'm not going to hold you in suspense. I'll tell you what it is
Okay.
that really taught me that it's the time horizon that actually makes a huge difference when we're thinking about what happens. So someone who's loud may get attention in the short term,
Mm.
but it isn't what lasts and what makes a difference, what changes thinking in the long term, unless there's actual viability to whatever that person is saying so loudly. So I mean, the thing that really, the experience that really taught me that is that in addition to, the all the years now I've spent in reasoning research and in message design and in branding and marketing in the early days, I moonlighted as a Weight Watchers leader for 13 years.
I was going to ask
Um,
about that part of your life. Yeah,
yeah,
go for
and
it.
so that was very, very formative because it taught me, over the 13 years, I did the math one time, that was over 3,000 meetings that I led. So 3,000 discussions I facilitated with people who desperately wanted to make some kind of change for the sake of their health or whatever it might have been. And it's a notoriously difficult change to make. Um, and yet, I believed very strongly you know, in how, when presented in a way that made sense to people, is the thing I discovered over time. It could be so like this particular structure of just thinking about how to think about things like activity and your mindset and food, what kind of benefit that could have. And what I discovered with that was that, wouldn't you know it, a lot of the things that actually worked, which I can say, I think with some authority after 13 years, um, we're 180 degrees from what is generally considered best practice in persuasion or change management or change communications or marketing and all of that. And I was like,
It's
okay,
interesting. Yeah.
interesting. And so
Yeah.
I started to take and just, I was lucky enough to be in positions where, yeah, resource constrained, let's call it that, which meant I didn't have a huge number of people to like report to, um, or that reported to me, so I could be pretty experimental. And I just
Mm.
started taking some of the lessons I learned about what worked in that meeting room in that kind of very personal space and used it in my day job. And yeah, over and over and over again, I saw that it was much more effective in both the short term and the long term. And so, I had that, once I had that bit in my teeth, I just continued to run with it. And, there's a direct line from that kind of discovery through to like my developing the red thread through to the work that I'm continuing to do now, which is all
Yeah.
still connected, but
Yeah.
um it really does come down from the idea that any change has to happen, whether we're looking at societal level change or an individual level change. That change has to start within the people, right? And so we have to make sure that any change makes is coherent to people and with people and what they already believe, or else there's just, again, maybe it's not no chance, but it's not, I don't think it's out of the I don't think it's out of the single digits, right? To for
Yeah.
success. Um, And I've had the luck now this to spend so much time with so many beautiful ideas of all kinds, because I do a lot of work with professional speakers and other folks as well, um, authors, etc. And there, I've just gotten to this point where like nothing makes me like madder or sadder than an idea that should be out there
Mm.
and isn't, because of a very solvable, fixable problem and how it's presented. And again, this isn't copywriting and wordsmithing and positioning. This
Yeah.
is making sure that the viability of the idea is built in and communicated from the very beginning in a way that doesn't need to be relying on persuasion, um, or coercion or manipulation, because that's a big part of my work, is how do we do this without that.
Yeah.
um, but when an idea is strong enough, when it's viable enough, when it's credible enough, when it just makes sense, it it just replaces any need for manipulation. So, and I've
Mm.
seen that over and over again.
So do you have to get past the humanness of people having an inner rebel? They want change and yet resist
um
it. I have an inner rebel, just
Of
asking,
course. No, it's like, and
nothing to do
there's
with
some
me,
people
but
like,
just curious.
yeah.
We
So I
want
think the thing
change, but it's
is that,
big.
and so I would say that yes, you do have to, and that's one of the predictable, one of those, that's a predictable objection, is the first time that you present someone in anything that feels or is, well, Jen, you should.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that is a predictable failure point,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
because it just varies a little cultural to, culture to culture. But I mean, we as humans, uh, we we value our own agency. We value our ability. It's particularly true in Western cultures. But even if we look at it from the perspective of reasonableness, and I know that sounds all rational and whatever, but trust me, I am, to quote my friend Laura Belgray, woo adjacent. Um, the idea of, totally lost my train of thought. I got all woo adjacent and then I lost my train of thought. Um uh the 50s are such a great age.
It is
What was I
exciting,
saying?
isn't it?
It is
Best
exciting.
time of our
Yeah, I know.
life.
Yes, I was talking, gosh, wow, where did it go? It
It'll come
totally
back.
went. It will. Um,
We were talking about the rebel. We want change,
Inner
but
rebel.
we,
There we go. Yes.
yeah, our
So the
inner rebel still
reasonableness,
stops
right?
us.
So
Free
so
resistant.
the minute we introduce something as if I know better
Yeah.
than what you do, like that somehow I'm presenting something as I know I'm right, which therefore makes you, if
Wrong.
not wrong, at least
Yeah.
not right. Which means that I am immediately, even if it's not my intent, there is some part of me that says you are being unreasonable with whatever you're doing right now. And this is a thing that it's kind of one of my side quests of research, but the 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 self-conception of someone being a reasonable person is even more true than this desire for agency, right? So because it's again, it comes back to like what makes sense. So the moment you
Mm.
tell someone anything that makes them feel like, well, how do you not know this already?
Yeah.
Like, you are going to trigger that. So this
Yeah.
is not about ignoring the humanness. It's about accounting for it. And it's about understanding that the hardest thing we can do as humans is expect a human to not act like a human. So why do we keep doing that? I mean, we ask people to unbelieve things that they believe. We ask them to unwant things that they want. We ask them to want things that they don't want. We ask them to believe things that they just don't believe. And going directly at it, almost guaranteed to fail. Almost guaranteed to fail. But contrast that with saying, listen, I get why you do that. And actually, it makes sense. Here's my perspective. And this is how I think about it. And with this idea of A, I am feel confident that this is why I believe this, that I believe that we need to solve this thing this way. I'm confident that, the more that somebody has genuine conviction in an idea, the more likely their action is to follow. I believe that because, we are creatures of habit, right? And there is nothing stronger than our pre-existing beliefs.
Mm.
So if I can say, so that's where I'm starting, like it seems like it works. But again, if that's not what you see, let's talk. Not I'm right, you're wrong. It's
Yeah.
like, one of my favorite phrases that I picked up from a classmate of mine is my current opinion is. My current view is that this is the way to do this. And here's why I think that. And again, not support, like one of the things I do with my work, particularly when first introducing an idea or our perspective or our philosophy. Like, say you're in a job interview and someone says, well, tell me who you are and what you're about, is not to give data, it's to give beliefs and principles. So like, well, I believe, right, that there are many, many ideas out there in the world that are not getting the attention they need for very solvable problems, right? But I also believe, because this is true, because every idea has a story, right? And the story we tell ourselves are the ones that are most powerful of all, that if we can build that kind of story around an idea, that we can really make a big difference in the world.
Mm.
Um, let me tell you how I've done that over my career, right? Like
Yeah. Different introduction to it. So that
different,
shows your values when you're doing that, showing more
yeah,
your essence than your
yeah, I mean,
data.
it's like, yes, I mean, to be quite transparent, I'm still trying to figure that part out. So,
Mm.
I started talking about like midlife being a wonderful time to actually, say, as far as I'm concerned, I'm around for a good 40 or 50 more years. So I am
Yeah,
making
totally.
the best of it.
I got a
So
good
I put
30 to
myself
40. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. I put myself in a doctoral program 2 years ago at the age of 50. And so part of what I am studying is this. And my current view, what I believe this does is that it gives somebody like a little snapshot of the whole little logical package. And it literally is. If I'm working with clients on building this for whatever application, that's where we start. We start with a little tiny package where you're saying, I believe that this approach is the way to achieve this outcome because I believe these two things to be true.
Mhm.
And that's it. And what I think it does is, it does a number of things simultaneously. One of the most important things is that because it's so brief, it gives someone a whole snapshot. Second, it's using a pattern of logic that even our automatic intuitive processes of our brains recognize because it's relying on cause and effect. It's relying on stimulus and response, which is one of the most foundational elements of understanding available in the animal world. I mean, you have dogs, you said you have a crazy cocker spaniel.
Yeah,
They understand cause and effect. Right. We don't even need words for cause and effect, stimulus and response. Hello, babies, right? Like the dogs, they also don't need words for stimulus and response.
totally.
So by including both of those things and kind of building on that with, okay, I now the reason why I believe that is because of these two things. And instead of using data, traditional data, because 9 out of 10 doctors say, no, you're explaining it based on principles of how you see the world working. And I believe there are many, 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 many more of those that we share than that we don't. And
Mhm.
so yeah, it is values, but it's not so much saying, well, because I believe in the inherent quality of blah, 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 which is absolutely valuable. But in that moment, as weird as it is, it can carry a risk, right?
Mm.
Um, and by saying, I believe, that what goes up must come down, or that seeing is believing, or that, all sorts of stuff like accountability is the ownership of outcomes. You're in a point of shared understanding of how the world works, that goes, oh, well, there's a thing that I know makes sense because I've seen it happen myself. So the only data that you're really presenting is things that have already been validated by the person you're talking to. Right. And as long as they are interested in that outcome, then they will be, or they're interested in you and that perspective, you are honoring that tiny window of openness that someone has
Yep.
to hearing whether or not they should continue to listen, right? Or pay attention or to, bestow trust or credibility or et cetera.
As we age, does that change? Because in our 50s, 60s, estrogen's dropping, our care
Yeah.
factor, the nurturing care factor leaves us, and our
Yeah.
deeper care factor kicks in, but it also comes with a bullshit meter, as we say in
Oh
Australia.
yeah, it's so
And our
good, right?
bullshit meter's
Yes.
like fucking on
Very high.
point.
Yes. This is
So,
why I think like women our age, we are killer at this.
yeah.
So, but there's actually really some very interesting research and theory about how why we are wired in the way that we are. So you and your listeners are probably familiar with the fact that we have one brain generally, and that there's two, and there's but it's processing information in two ways all at the same time. And this has been established both from kind of a reasoning back standpoint as well as a neuroscience forward, like in behavioral science forward. So it's kind of one of the things that's very well established. Official name for it, dual process theory.
Okay.
Um, don't need to worry about that. I like to think about it because they're like good, intuitively understandable. We've got an analytical process happening all the time. That one's slower. That's the conscious one. That's the one that is like looking for the holes in the argument, like consciously, and be like, oh, you you performed this logical fallacy, or that data isn't true, or whatever. You see my dog in the background. And then
Love you, dog.
and then we've got our automatic processing, which a lot of times people try to make it say it's rational and emotional. And I'm like, that is short circuiting and short changing. There's a whole bunch of stuff in that automatic, emotion being one of them. But the automatic processes also include things like intuition, things like the mental shortcuts we have built up over time based on all those learned and observed stimulus and
Mm,
responses. It's kind of like how if you drive to work the same way every day, eventually you are no longer paying attention to how you're driving to work. It's automatic, right?
yeah.
That's what I'm talking about. And so anytime new information is coming in, it's being processed by both of those systems at the same time. That automatic system, because it's faster, delivers its judgment first, right? So the minute it hears, like we get that something, they're like, something's wrong about that.
Yeah.
Like it kicks it over to the analytic process. And then we're like, why? All right. Something's not right there. What is now I'm consciously thinking about what's wrong with this. Um, and there is an really interesting theory called the argumentative theory of reasoning. You can start to figure out what this means. Is that there's one, there's a fairly well, they're very, it's an accepted theory that one of the, that perhaps we developed this dual system of processing so that we could both build and take apart arguments. Meaning, if I'm the head of my tribe and I'm saying, hey, we need to go over to this, across the pass because, all the water's gone here, right? I need to be able to make that case really well.
Mm,
But if we were only able to make good cases, then we would not have like balance in the universe, right?
yeah.
We've got to have the ability to go, bullshit. No, you are telling us that because that's good for you, not because it's good, the thing that's good for the clan, right?
Right.
Um, and that's how we keep balance. And so it's that is one of those theories that makes sense to me, right? Because it would explain things like confirmation bias, where we're really good about collecting information that like supports
Supports
our own
us.
point of view.
Totally.
Yeah, exactly.
Can
And we're
justify
really
anything.
good about spotting the problem in somebody else's story, argument, whatever, and really bad at spotting it in our own.
Yeah. Can't see
Um,
our own blind spots.
exactly. And so this is why I think that wise women, have an especially sharp opportunity here because it, as you say, there is, if some of the more recent theories about the role of the wise woman, of the elder woman is this kind of continuity of the tribe, it's even more important that we're able to go, nope, nope, yes, here's something better, here's why, to be even stronger at this ability to make a case for something that just makes more sense. And again, I know that sounds very rational, but yeah, as I said before, whenever I say make sense, I mean all of it. I mean, it needs to make sense automatically. It needs to make sense analytically, intuitively, emotionally, intellectually, all of it. And if something doesn't make sense, right, it starts to erode all of the things that we need for it to be successful. But the good news is, and this is where, I keep trying to prove it wrong in my work, and I have yet to, and I've been doing this work this way for over 10 years now. Um, is that if you have done a series of things in your life, if you have achieved anything, and it doesn't even have to be big, if you have an idea, a way to do something that you believe in, even if it's just like the best way to like fold towels, I don't care. You did that thing, you do that thing because it makes sense to you to do it that way. In other words, you already have a really, really strong internal logical little unit case that you're telling yourself about why you do things your way. And so that's the great joy of my work. Again, whatever we're trying to do it for is that it's always there. And
Mm.
so what I've seen over and over again, and again, it started originally trying to help, people speaking about their ideas feel more confident in it, was there's this amazing thing that happens when you understand why, not just that your idea or your way of doing something is good because you think it is, but why it's good and why it's strong in a way that other people would also agree it's strong. That is an enormously, incredibly empowering, grounding, confidence building thing because it really puts you in the position of saying, listen, I believe that, every decision has a story. I believe it. It happens to be backed up by a lot of science. But if you don't believe that, then I don't really understand why you don't. But okay, as long as you've heard me and heard why I believe it, and if you can be like, yeah, I get it, but I don't agree,
Mm.
it makes it so much easier to go, you're not my people. You're not like,
Mm.
I am here. Like I see this a lot with my work. Like I frame my work oftentimes in how do we build buy-in for ideas? And what I mean by that is genuine conviction in something. How do buy-in meaning someone believes enough in something to act on it and to keep acting on it, not just once.
Yeah.
And the reason I start there is that if you don't already believe in the value of that internally motivated action, not my people.
Yeah. And that's
You
whether you're
like,
communicating to family, community, workplace, anything.
yeah. And so it really is about getting to a point where, so, and this isn't just like, declaring all of this and be like, you're not my people, you're not my people. I mean, to me, the goal here is to find the shared goal, right? Shared question, your best effort at like, what do I think both you and I would care about? Even if we're on opposite sides of the aisle or whatever it might be. And to base that approach that we're thinking about that outcome, that, if we want this, then I believe this approach, using that kind of because in the end, those principles, again, going for principles that we've worked really hard to make sure that they are as inarguable as possible. And if they are arguable to the person, again, that's a go no go, right? So, but there are sets of beliefs that have that kind of binary, which aren't crossable. So we need to avoid those, frankly, because there are people who, for instance, believe that the world is a beautiful place, and there's people who believe the world is an ugly place.
Lucky place.
And
Yeah.
never the twain shall meet. These people do not understand each other. So, but it doesn't mean that they can't agree on other things.
Yeah.
And I believe that's the same thing is true even if we're thinking about ideological differences or political differences or faith-based differences, that there really is, this is one of my side quests of my research, I believe quite a wide band of shared beliefs about how the world works, which aren't values per se. It's just, again, it's almost more basic than that. It's more prime than that. It's these are first, I mean, they really, in science and math, they're first principles. We generally agree that gravity exists, right?
Yeah.
We haven't been able to disprove it. So maybe that's not what it is, but for now, we're going to go with this as a shared agreement, right? And so it's those kinds of things that I think that give us power, both as individuals, but me personally, I think there's a lot of hope to be had, even in this kind of split, polarized world, because I think it's more that we just have culturally, and this is true across many cultures, lost the skill of exploring and or communicating to explore rather than communicating to persuade, convince, defeat, shame, separate, etc. And that used to be, back in the ancient Greece, and I haven't had a chance to see like if there are similar. Oh, actually, I saw a really interesting article about this. It was talking about this kind of the Indian, like centuries old tradition of argumentation and like talking through things and figuring things out. But I think that for whatever reason, we've lost this skill set.
Mm.
Good news is it's not that it never was there. It's just that we've
Yeah.
lost it, which means we can regain it. And so
Have we lost our
um,
curiosity? Are we so stuck in this logical world that
I
we've
don't think
lost our
so.
curiosity?
No, no. I
No?
mean, because curiosity is, I mean, I think maybe some cultural curiosity, right? Like I do know people who are like, yeah, I'm just not going to talk to these people anymore because there's just no point in it. And I'm like, you be you, fine.
Sure.
And so I think that's sad, as somebody who
Mm.
um I study adult learning, like I'm endlessly, I'd like to think of myself as endlessly curious. Um, but curiosity, as it turns out, I mean, from a scientific standpoint, is a drive state, like hunger, sex drive, etc. Meaning once it's invoked, it must be satisfied. And so you don't just lose a drive state, right? And the only thing that's required to activate the drive state of curiosity is to pose a question that is of importance to the person you're talking to and does not yet, to them, have a satisfactory answer. That's all you have to do. That's all it takes. And so, one of the things that I get mad about when I see people, talking about marketing and sales and whatever. They're like, oh, you have to like come up with this big problem. I'm like, y'all, an unanswered question is enough of a problem for somebody's brain to engage right away.
Mm.
Like, is it even possible to solve this polarized world? Now, some people may not be curious about that answer. I am. I
I,
am, but that's okay. Even if somebody isn't, then that's not the question to start with, right? There's going to be something else though
mm.
that is of interest to them, I believe, and that's the goal, is to say where can we find the shared question that we both care about that doesn't yet have a good answer. And so this is one of those things where when we're trying to find shared ground, that's an important piece. But even if we're just introducing ourselves for the first time or just trying to like, claim our space in the world and kind of like establish, that undeniable right to be heard, and for our voice to be out there, it starts with sometimes taking a little bit of a risk and saying, I am trying to answer this question. Like, even as you said to me, like, what are you here about? I'm like, I'm trying to understand how do we accelerate adoption, the adoption of new ideas, understanding and adoption of new ideas. You may not care about that. Somebody might think that's a ridiculous thing to spend your life doing. Fine. But it is the thing that it is, in fact, the thing that I've
That's your
spent my
thing.
life
Yeah.
like, that's my thing. So again, it's like, okay, I mean, I'm down with it. If you're not, totally fine. But at least, it's this idea of being able to speak your piece, right? And
Mm.
I think what is true, we've gotten less and less, the window for us being able to speak our piece has gotten tinier and tinier and tinier.
Mm.
Like, and that's the thing we have, it's like, and that's part of why so much of my work is on the accelerating piece. Like, how can we do this quickly? Um, because we need it to be quick. And I think that's the thing that's changed. Um, but I think that, I mean, I would be curious to see if there's any research on this. Like, literally, like, how many questions do we actually have to answer and ask and answer over the course of a day? A bunch. So
Mm.
it's inhuman to be incurious. And so I think it would be, frankly, a too easy answer to
Mm.
say we just aren't curious anymore. I think that I think I would say it's more true that we have allowed ourselves to become incurious about certain things. Because it's convenient to us to not be curious about them.
Yeah.
Um, and that's
Denial's
again,
wonderful.
it's a reasonable thing. Like,
Yeah.
we don't want to discover that perhaps we've been unreasonable. And the easiest way to discover that perhaps we might have been unreasonable is to kind of check it out. Um, but I think, whether it's because, I'm female or I'm short or, for much of my life, this is still so weird for me. For much of my life, I was the youngest person in the room. Now it's very weird to not be. Um, and so I wasn't like given an automatic, my standing to speak was not given automatically. I mean,
Mm.
so much of what I've done is to be able to say, no, I have something of value to say, but I don't have a big opportunity to get that across. So I need to just drop something in the pond, right? That makes enough of a splash that someone goes, oh, wait a minute, tell me more. Now, I may not normally have listened to you about this, but this is about something I care about. That's an interesting example, interesting answer. I understand based on what you've just briefly described, just my brain is calculating, going, oh, I could see why that would work, but now I'm interested. Meaning there is a
So
point
you
at
get
which
heard.
curiosity, yeah,
Yeah.
it takes over, which is,
Yeah.
I think, fascinating and wonderful.
Yeah. So in midlife, so many women, the whole invisible thing is a thing, which I think, yeah, I've got my theories on it, but I'm curious. So many women have bought into that idea that their identity, they're done, and that it sucks in that. And yet there's women, you, me, so many women are in my world that are just like fucking powering on.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I'm like, oh
What are
my
they
gosh, I'm
not
so glad I don't
communicating?
have to worry about all that anymore. Yeah, obviously I'm not down for being ignored.
No,
Um,
same. But so many women are have bought into it
yeah,
in
I
the
mean,
Western world.
it and
How can they
so
communicate it different? Where
yeah,
do
so the thing is that if that's how somebody truly wants to feel, there's no going to be no getting out of it, right?
True.
But one of the things that I have personally seen as a very powerful, in my life over and over and over again is simply, again, the non-persuasive sharing of information that something that I previously thought was impossible was in fact possible. Right. And so, I put myself in a doctoral program because I met a woman who started a doctoral program at 47. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, I mean, I know it's possible, but I haven't actually like spoken to somebody about it. So let me tell about it. When I was overweight, which is the whole reason why I started Weight Watchers, the reason why I even started to figure out how I might be able to do that was because I was talking to a woman who was like my same height and the weight that I would have liked to have been. And she was telling me how she had been the weight that I was at the moment, like 50 pounds heavier. And I'm like, oh, that's possible. And so I think that I think those of us who consider this there to be an alternate path have, to the extent that we feel responsible, I personally feel responsible to say, I am going to be out there as an example of this is possible. And
Same.
if you want to do that, great. I will do anything I can to help you. And if you do not, and if you don't think that it's worth it, fine. It's Yoda. You're right, right? Like, do or do not, right? I'm confusing my Confucius and my Yoda, but you know what I'm saying? It's like
Yeah.
whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. And so my work and my passion is dedicated for the people who have even just the sneaking hint of a belief. One of the things I used to say to my Weight Watcher members was, you don't have to believe you can, but you can't believe you can't. Like it, we can, you know, the first thing is like, you have to believe that it's not impossible, right? And then we have to secure like at least a tentative belief that something is possible in principle, right? Just it might be possible. And that's where seeing other examples or even just explaining certain things about how things work. When someone goes, oh, well, that makes sense. Then someone starts to go, then the curiosity and the possibility starts to get a little bit bigger. And they're like, okay, well, what would that look like for me? Right. And then finally there's that assessment of like, okay, was it worth it? And the thing is, so when someone is, has seems to have bought in or given up or whatever, one of the first things I would be curious about is which of those beliefs, which one is the one that's really holding them back, that it's not worth it, shouldn't even try, that's not possible or not possible for them, because that would give us a much more tailored way to respond to that. So, I mean, we can't solve everybody all the time. Not everybody wants to be solved.
Mm.
But to me, like, it's important for me personally, for how I'm wired, no judgment for those who are wired differently, to say, I I don't, I get to decide what I am doing or not doing and what's worth it. And again, part of the reason why I do the work that I do is like, try to ignore me. Just try, right? It's kind of like to say what they can't unhear. It's like, I'm going to keep figuring this out until, even when you don't want to, it will at least be heard, right? And processed. And then what happens from that, that's up to you, right? But it's, if I can just, that for me has always been the most important thing. Is like, you don't have to agree, but I do need you to hear me. And so, because I believe I have a point of view that is worth hearing, and it may be wrong and it may not be appropriate, whatever, but it could be good. It could be right. And wouldn't it be unfortunate to miss out on that? Um, and so that's why I've worked so hard for myself and for others to say, how do I give it the best chance of being heard? Not so that I can say it, but so that whatever it is that we're trying to achieve together has a more likely, or has a fuller information, um, as we figure out what that step is, or what this world looks like.
So how do you think a woman, a midlife woman, accesses the courage to use their voice in that moment? Totally get it. And then
So
you just said, so how do they access, for some of them, it's a
yeah,
fucking huge leap to use their
yeah. I mean,
voice.
so as with many things, I think it's a little bit of, do a little bit of thinking ahead of time. Um, and I think one of the most important things is to, again, one of the things that's been most useful for me is to frame things from the point of view of, what are the big questions that I am just endlessly curious about, right? And so, yeah, from a work standpoint, it can be about ideas, but I am endlessly curious about how people change how they think, right? Like, endlessly curious about that. I'm endlessly curious on how do we close that gap between aspiration and actuality, right? And so, and I believe that, I mean, I can also be endlessly curious about, like, why do dogs behave the way they do? I mean, it doesn't always have to be these like heady things. I'm like, why is it that this happens this way? Um, and I think one of the most powerful things that women can do is to say, what are the questions that have led me from one question, like from one path to another throughout my life? Because I am convinced that it all can be made to make sense. I am convinced because it all did make sense to you at one point or another. And you may not be entirely happy with how it all turned out, but it all had a good reason for you to do it that way. It really did. And so to me, just even understanding that, like, right, that there always is a reasonable explanation for why we've done what we've done, and that finding the positive frame of that reasonable explanation is a very, very strong foundation for of doing the scary thing in the moment. Um, and I think it's really about saying, okay, great, faced with a question, what do I know to be true that would explain why this would work? Not why it wouldn't, why it would. Because that's how we move forward. That's how we find this. Because, like, it when we know that the world works in a certain way, again, not how it doesn't work, but how it does, it becomes a lot more like that you can be confident in that. And one of the things that I would say, and I still believe to this day, and it's a major principle underlying my work, is that the biggest leaps start from the surest ground. And what I mean by that is that we are, as humans, wildly pattern driven people. We are. And sometimes those patterns are destructive, but even destructive patterns have a positive intent behind them almost always. We're trying to make ourselves feel better. We're trying to take care of other people. We're trying to like fulfill something, right? And doesn't mean that that was always great, but there was always a good reason. It always made sense for us to do this. The key is to understand that those patterns, no matter what, have built up some incredibly strong, positive muscles for you. And that anything that you do is built that is built from those muscles is much more likely to be powerful and stable and a basis for even a huge change than something that feels like a wild reach that you're not even sure of. I don't say don't reach, but push with the legs. Those are stronger.
All right. Wow. I want to respect your time, and time is racing away. Holy shit. If what have we not spoken about that you would want to get on your soapbox if you could right now? What is
Hmm.
calling you as a woman of age in the world, oh wise woman?
Um, that everybody's point of view is unique, right? I think multiple people can have the same thought, but no two people have the same line of thinking to get there. And if nothing else, like nobody has reached, I believe everybody has reached their point of view from a unique, truly, I mean, actually unique path, basis of belief, principles, background, experiences, etc. Which means everybody has that source of power. And so to me, it's understanding whether it's broadly or even just to get started, just think just one little thing, like what's your point of view on something? What do you believe about this thing? Why do you believe that? And
Mm.
just starting to exercise that little muscle of, all right, well, here's a meeting where I'm not being asked, but here's what I think the answer is. Why do I like, I may not have yet the voice to put it out there, but why would this work? Like, okay, I believe it would, but why would it in a way that everybody else would understand? And just trying to practice that because your point of view is, I think, the only truly ownable and unique asset that you have. And so discover what that is, bring it out. You do it in quiet if you need to, but the more that you can say, I am the only person who has thought about it this way, and the fact that I am here means something. So let's do that. I think that's an important piece.
Mm. Tamsen Webster, with the wisdom that you have today, if you went back to your 18-year-old self, what would you whisper in your ear?
Uh, If it feels right, do it. And if it doesn't, don't.